The air in the study always tasted of old paper and something like dried ink. It was a scent I'd associated with my father, then with my own work, and now with her, my wife. Her absence was a palpable thing in this room, a hollow space where laughter used to echo. The mahogany desk, scarred by decades of use, felt cold beneath my fingertips. I traced a deep gouge, a relic of some forgotten argument or a spilled inkwell, and my thoughts drifted, as they always did, to the time before. I'd retreated to the family estate in region not on standard maps for this, a place where the sky pressed down, vast and indifferent, and the only sounds were the wind's low moan through the skeletal trees and the distant, mournful cry of some unseen bird. My father had kept it this way, a sanctuary from the clamor of the world. He'd been a collector of obscure knowledge, a man who believed the universe held secrets not meant for casual eyes. I'd inherited his library, his curiosity, and now this profound, suffocating quiet. But lately even the stars felt distant, their light a mockery of the warmth I'd lost. I'd been sifting through old data, a task I'd set for myself to keep my mind from unraveling. Not the cutting-edge stuff from the observatory, but the archival records, the forgotten transmissions, the digital ghosts of observations long past. It was a form of penance, I suppose, or perhaps just a way to avoid looking too closely at the life I'd built, or rather, the life that had been dismantled around me. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, tiny, ephemeral worlds in themselves. I ran a hand through my thinning hair, the familiar ache behind my eyes a dull throb. The hum of the ancient refrigerator in the kitchen, the only concession to modernity in this wing of the house, was a low drone that vibrated through the floorboards. Then I saw it. A blip, not just a blip, but a pattern. It was buried deep within a dataset from the early 2000s, a survey of a seemingly unremarkable sector of deep space. The data itself was mundane, a steady stream of spectral analysis and light curves, but this was different. It was a signal, or rather, a series of anomalies that pulsed with an unnatural regularity, not the random flicker of a distant quasar, nor the predictable decay of a stellar object. This was structured, ordered. My heart gave a strange, unfamiliar lurch. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was the thrill of the chase, the spark of intellectual engagement that had defined my life. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath misting the cool glass. The lines on the graph shifted, resolved, and then coalesced into something that looked impossibly like an intentional message. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like a whisper in a hurricane, but it was there. I spent hours, then days, lost in the data. The world outside the study ceased to exist. Meals went uneaten, sleep became a forgotten luxury. The wind howled, the birds cried, but I heard only the faint, insistent rhythm of the anomaly. I cross-referenced, I reanalyzed, I ran every diagnostic I could think of. The signal persisted. It was not an error. It was not a known celestial phenomenon. It was something else. The implications began to dawn on me slowly, like a sunrise over an alien landscape. If this was real, if this pattern was indeed a deliberate construct, then the universe was far stranger, far more populated than we had ever dared to imagine. And this wasn't just a passive observation. The structure of the anomaly, its peculiar timing, suggested an active presence, a consciousness. A prickle of unease began to snake its way through me. The stars were beginning to emerge, pinpricks of light in the encroaching blackness. They had always been a source of comfort, a reminder of the vast, ordered universe. I zoomed in on the source of the anomaly, a region of space that should have been nothing but dust and gas. The resolution was poor, the data ancient. But there, at the very edge of what the instruments could resolve, was a distortion, a subtle warping of the cosmic background radiation, as if something immense and unseen had passed through, leaving a ripple in its wake. It was too regular, too precise, to be natural. My hands began to tremble. The inkwell on the desk, a heavy, ornate thing my mother had given me, seemed to sweat a thin film of condensation. I wiped my brow, my skin clammy. The wind outside picked up, rattling the window panes with a sudden ferocity. It sounded like a frantic knocking. The pattern in the data resolved itself further, and I saw it. A sequence. It was not a word I recognized, not from any human language. It was a warning, or perhaps an invitation. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. The familiar scent of old paper and ink was now tinged with something else, something metallic and acrid like ozone. My own breath hitched in my throat. The stars outside, once so distant and serene, now felt close, their light too bright, too sharp. Was this discovery a gift or a curse? And what had I just woken? My wife. The mahogany desk, scarred by decades of use, felt colder than usual beneath my fingertips. The data streams from the observatory, usually a comforting cascade of numbers and graphs, seemed to mock me with their predictable order. It had been weeks since the first flicker, a ghost in the cosmic background radiation, a whisper in the static of the universe. I dismissed it, of course. Fatigue, a glitch in the equipment, my own grief playing tricks on my perception. My colleagues at the Institute had been understanding. They'd offered condolences, suggested time off. But the data, that faint, almost imperceptible deviation, had burrowed into my mind like a persistent tick. Tonight, the hum of the old servers in the basement of the family estate in region not on standard maps felt amplified. Each whir and click vibrated through the floorboards, a mechanical heartbeat in the otherwise silent house. It was here, surrounded by the ghosts of my ancestors and the tangible ache of my loss, that I pursued my research, far from the prying eyes and polite skepticism of the academic world. I was running the standard diagnostic on the deep space array, a routine I'd performed countless times. The holographic projection shimmered into existence above the desk, a swirling nebula of light and data points. I traced a finger through the simulated starfield, my gaze distant. Then it happened. A ripple. It wasn't a data spike, not a sudden burst of energy. It was something subtler, a disruption in the very fabric of the projection. Fold. It was as if a cosmic origami artist had creased the universe itself. My breath hitched. My hand froze midair. I blinked hard. The projection remained unwavering. The ripple was gone. I leaned closer, my eyes straining. It was impossible. The array was calibrated to the nanosecond. Such an anomaly so profound should have registered with alarms blaring, with every sensor screaming. But there was nothing. Only the usual, predictable hum of the universe. I initiated a full system sweep. Every component, every line of code, every sensor. The results scrolled across a secondary monitor, a blur of green text confirming operational integrity. No errors, no anomalies. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was not a glitch. This was not fatigue. I remembered the first time. A faint discrepancy, easily explained away. But this was different. This was a visible, tangible distortion, even if only for a fleeting moment. I called up the raw data logs from the past 24 hours, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I cross-referenced the timestamps, searching for any corroborating evidence, any stray signal that might have been missed. The familiar patterns of quasars and pulsars filled the screen, a comforting, albeit sterile, display of cosmic order. Then, buried deep within a terabyte of background noise, I found it. A single, anomalous data packet. It was minuscule, almost lost in the static, but its signature was unique. It didn't correspond to any known celestial phenomenon. It was patterned, not random. I isolated the packet, amplifying its signal, running it through a series of spectral analyses. The results were baffling. The packet contained a sequence of information that defied classification. It wasn't radio waves, not gamma rays, not any form of electromagnetic radiation I recognized. It was something else, something alien. I remembered the feeling of loss when my wife had passed, the crushing weight of emptiness. This was different. I replayed the holographic projection, focusing on the precise moment the ripple had appeared. I slowed it down, frame by frame. And there, within the distortion, I saw it. A shape. It was too indistinct to identify, too ephemeral to grasp, but it was there. Something had moved within the fabric of space. My hands trembled. I pushed away from the desk, the chair scraping loudly on the wooden floor. I needed air. The stars were out, countless pinpricks of light in the inky blackness. For years I had looked at them with a sense of wonder, a scientific curiosity. Now I saw them with a new, terrifying understanding. They were not just distant suns. They were part of a vast, intricate mechanism, a tapestry woven by forces I was only beginning to glimpse. The anomaly had reappeared. It was undeniable. It was a tangible disruption, a sign that something was out there, something ancient and powerful that was not content to remain in the silent depths of space. What had I seen in that fleeting distortion? What was the nature of that impossible data packet? And why had it appeared now in the quiet solitude of my study? My wife. I traced a deep gouge near the edge, a relic from my father's younger, more tempestuous days. Now, it was just another silent witness to the creeping stillness that had settled over the family estate in region not on standard maps. The data streams, once a comforting river of predictable celestial ballet, had become a source of gnawing unease. The anomalies weren't just statistical outliers. They possessed a disturbing pattern, a purpose that defied every known law of physics. I'd spent days, then weeks, hunched over the monitors, the glow of the screens painting my face in shifting hues of blue and green. Sleep had become a luxury I couldn't afford, a concession to a world that no longer held my full attention. I reran the spectrographic analysis for the 10th time. The readings from the Kepler 186F system, specifically the faint but persistent energy signature I'd isolated, refused to align with any known stellar or planetary phenomenon. It was like finding a single, perfectly formed obsidian shard in a field of rough granite. It didn't belong. The signature pulsed, a slow, deliberate beat that was too regular to be natural, too complex to be random noise. It was a signal, but from what? Or more terrifyingly, who? My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up historical astronomical logs, cross-referencing with ancient star charts I'd inherited from my father. He'd been a collector of curiosities, of forgotten lore, alongside his more conventional astronomical pursuits. I'd always dismissed them as the eccentricities of an aging mind. I found it a faded notation on a parchment map, brittle with age, depicting constellations as they would have appeared millennia ago. A cluster of stars, corresponding to the Kepler 186F region, was marked with a symbol I didn't recognize. It looked like a coiled serpent, or perhaps a stylized eye. The data wasn't just an anomaly, it was a resonance, a faint echo from something impossibly distant, impossibly old. The energy signature wasn't emanating from the system. It was a reflection, a ripple caused by something far greater passing through that cosmic neighborhood. But the sheer scale of the energy required to create such a detectable ripple, it beggared belief. It implied a power that dwarfed supernova, that dwarfed galaxies. I zoomed in on the spectral decomposition of the signal. There were harmonic frequencies, impossibly complex and interwoven like a symphony played on instruments that had never existed. It wasn't just energy, it was information, encoded, but the sheer density of it was overwhelming. My current processing capabilities, even with the custom algorithms I'd spent months developing, were like a child's toy trying to decipher a universal language. Then, a new pattern emerged. A subtle modulation within the signal, almost imperceptible but undeniably present. It was a rhythmic fluctuation, a slow rise and fall that seemed to correlate with something. I cross-referenced it with terrestrial seismic activity, with solar flare data, with global atmospheric pressure readings. Nothing. It was independent of any earthly or solar phenomenon. My breath hitched. I expanded the temporal window of the analysis, tracing the modulation backward. It was faint, almost undetectable at first, but it was there, and it was growing. Slowly, glacially, but undeniably. It was like watching a shadow lengthen on a sunlit wall, a shadow cast by a sun I couldn't see. A sudden, sharp rap at the study door made me jump. My heart, a traitorous organ, hammered against my ribs. The sound was too loud, too abrupt for this house. It was the groundskeeper, a man whose stoic silence was usually as reliable as the turning of the seasons. His voice, however, held a tremor I'd never heard before. The sky. It's not right, Thomas. I pushed my chair back, the worn leather groaning in protest. My hands were trembling. I'd forgotten the world outside this room, the world that was, perhaps, no longer just a passive observer. I walked to the window, my movements stiff, my muscles protesting the long hours of immobility. I pushed aside a heavy velvet curtain. The sky, it wasn't right. The stars were there, the familiar constellations, but they seemed dimmer. And between them, where there should have been only the deep velvet of night, there was a subtle, shifting iridescence, like oil on water but on a cosmic scale. A faint, sickly luminescence that pulsed with the same slow, deliberate rhythm as the signal from Kepler 186f. My eyes, accustomed to the sterile glow of the monitors, struggled to comprehend the distortion. It was as if the fabric of the night itself was fraying, thinning, revealing something else beneath. Something vast and ancient and utterly alien. The air in the study, once comforting in its familiarity, now felt thin and brittle as if it too might tear. They were all around me. What was this luminescence, and why was it growing? The oppressive silence of the study pressed in. Dust motes, illuminated by the weak, late afternoon sun filtering through the leaded panes, danced in their own tiny universes. I ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of the mahogany desk, a futile attempt to ground myself. The data. The data was the only truth, the only solid thing left. But what did it mean? I returned to the terminal, the faint hum of its processors, a familiar, almost comforting sound. The spectral analysis I'd been running, the one that had sent a shiver down my spine, was complete. The anomalies weren't just present, they were patterned. Not random cosmic noise, not gravitational lensing, not any of the familiar celestial phenomena. This was deliberate, like a signature etched into the fabric of space-time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a hesitant tremor running through them. I'd been so consumed by the immediate implications, the terrifying possibility that something was looking back. But the older logs, the ones I'd initially dismissed as corrupted or irrelevant, held a different kind of horror. I opened them, the archaic file structure a stark contrast to the sleek interface of my current analysis. These were records from a much earlier era of astronomical observation, pre-digital, pre-space race even. Data painstakingly collected, painstakingly catalogued. I'd inherited this vast collection of my grandfather's work, a man obsessed with charting the unseen. Most of it was theoretical, speculative. But now, armed with the knowledge from my own research, I began to see the whispers, a series of entries from the 1930s. My grandfather, a younger man then, had been tracking a peculiar radio signal, faint, intermittent, originating from a region of the sky that held no known celestial bodies. He'd spent years trying to pinpoint its source, convinced it was a natural phenomenon, an unknown pulsar perhaps. His notes were filled with meticulous calculations, frustrated scribbles, but the signal's modulation. It was too structured, too complex. I isolated the recorded audio from one of the older tapes, a crackling hiss that filled the room. Then I fed it into my current analytical software, applying the same spectral decomposition that had revealed the anomalies in my own data. The air thickened, carrying the scent of old paper and something else, something acrid and metallic. The patterns that emerged on the screen were unmistakable. They mirrored the signature I had found. Not identical, but undeniably related. A dialect, perhaps, of the same language. My grandfather had been listening to the same cosmic conversation, centuries before I had even conceived of its existence. He'd never known what he was hearing. I scrolled further back. There were references to even older texts, bound in leather so brittle it threatened to crumble at a touch. My grandfather had corresponded with other astronomers, amateur and professional alike, across the globe. They spoke of strange lights in the sky, of unexplained terrestrial phenomena, of recurring myths and legends that hinted at visitors from beyond the stars. Not the fanciful tales of flying saucers, but something deeper, more primal. Narratives woven into the very tapestry of human history, recurring across cultures and millennia. One particular document, a handwritten journal from the early 1800s, detailed observations of the night sky from a remote outpost in the Himalayas. The author, a reclusive scholar, described celestial bodies not found on any chart, moving with impossible grace. He spoke of a silent, watching presence that seemed to imbue the very stars with a malevolent sentience. He'd vanished shortly after. My breath hitched. This wasn't a new phenomenon. This entity, this intelligence, had been interacting with our world and likely others for an immeasurable span of time. It wasn't a fleeting encounter. It was a persistent, subtle influence weaving itself into the cosmic narrative. My grandfather's radio signal, the scholars' celestial visitors, the ancient myths, they were all echoes of the same presence. The weight of it settled on me, a crushing realization. The universe wasn't just vast and indifferent. It was populated, and one of its inhabitants had turned its gaze towards us. The stars were beginning to emerge, pinpricks of distant light, but now they seemed less like distant suns and more like watchful eyes. What had it been looking for before, and what had changed? The data. The data was the only truth left. The numbers didn't lie, not like people did, not like she had. I'd spent weeks sifting through the raw transmissions, the spectral analyses, the gravitational wave echoes that pulsed from the void. At first, it was just noise, a cosmic static I almost dismissed as a glitch in the deep space arrays, but the patterns. Oh, the patterns. They were too intricate, too deliberate. Not the random sprawl of stellar nurseries or the chaotic dance of galaxies. This was an architecture, a design. The anomaly wasn't a single point, but a vast, interwoven tapestry of energy signatures stretching across light years. And it was growing, expanding, not in a natural, cosmological sense, but with an unnerving, directed expansion, like a stain spreading on a cosmic canvas. My fingers traced the worn leather binding of a forgotten tome on my father's desk. He had filled this study, this sprawling, isolated family estate in region not on standard maps, with his own obsessions. I'd always dismissed them as the ramblings of a brilliant but broken mind. Now, I wasn't so sure. I pulled up the latest set of readings. The anomaly had shifted. Its center of mass, if one could even call it that, had moved, and its trajectory was disturbing. It was not moving towards us, not directly. It was aligning. Aligning with what? I zoomed out, my screen filling with the familiar, comforting sprawl of our own galaxy. Then I superimposed the anomaly's vector. My breath hitched. It was aligning with a specific point. A point that held a profound, terrifying significance. It was aligning with the Perseus supercluster, and more specifically with a cluster of galaxies within it that had been exhibiting peculiar, unexplainable redshift anomalies for decades. My father had annotated these very galaxies in his star charts, scrawling cryptic phrases in the margins. The great convergence, the unmaking, when the sky tears. I'd thought them metaphors. The anomalies thrumming intensified, the subtle vibration resonating not just through my headphones, but through the very floorboards of the study. It was a sound that bypassed my ears, burrowing directly into my bones, a resonant frequency that felt ancient and wrong. The air grew heavy, thick with an ozone tang that made my teeth ache. I cross-referenced the anomaly's current position with predicted astronomical events. There was a confluence of celestial bodies approaching, a rare alignment of quasars and nebulae that occurred once every 10,000 cycles, a cosmic ballet insignificant to most. But this anomaly wasn't just observing it. It was anticipating it. It was moving into position. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. This was a preparation, a positioning of immense power geared towards a specific unfolding cosmic event. My wife, Alina, her laughter, the way she'd tilt her head when he was thinking. But the universe was not indifferent. It was occupied. The data streams flickered. A new set of readings began to populate the screen, originating from a point far beyond the anomaly, deeper in the black. They were faint, almost undetectable, but they were there, or perhaps a signal, a response. The anomaly pulsed again, a surge of energy that made the lights in the study dim for a terrifying second. The dust motes, moments before dancing in sunlight, now swirled in an unnatural vortex. The scent of ozone grew stronger, acrid, burning my nostrils. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling, the smooth mahogany of the desk suddenly feeling rough, alien. The anomaly wasn't just there. It was a deliberate presence, a colossal entity that had been waiting, orchestrating for millennia. And its gaze, its intention, was now fixed upon a specific point in space-time. A point that included us. The impending cosmic alignment, the anomaly's deliberate positioning. It all coalesced into a single, horrifying realization. The entity wasn't just observing the universe. It was preparing to act within it. And whatever it was preparing for, it was about to begin. The hum of the city felt distant, muffled by the thick stone walls of the study. Outside, the world carried on, oblivious. I could almost hear the distant clang of a tram, the murmur of traffic, the trivial concerns of everyday existence. Here, amidst the inherited silence of my ancestors, the weight of what I'd found was crushing. The data. It was more than just anomalous readings. It was a symphony of cosmic dread, a whisper from the void that spoke of immense, indifferent power. I needed to tell someone. The thought solidified, a desperate anchor in the swirling chaos of my mind. Who? The university, of course. My colleagues. They'd dismiss it, of course. They'd point to faulty equipment, to fatigue, to the lingering shadow of my grief over a leaner. But I had to try. The alternative was to sit here, alone, with the universe's most terrifying secret. I packed a single, worn leather satchel, a few printouts of the most damning spectral analysis, a USB drive containing the raw observational logs, and a thick notebook filled with my frantic annotations. The journey to the city felt like a descent. Each mile I put between myself and the quiet, echoing halls of the family estate in region not on standard maps was a step further into a reality that felt increasingly alien. The air in the astrophysics department was thick with the scent of stale coffee and ozone. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile, unfeeling glow. I found the head of the department, a stern woman named the chair, in her office. He was reviewing grant proposals, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Thomas," he said, his voice clipped, not looking up immediately. "To what do I owe the unexpected visit?" I placed my satchel on the edge of her desk. My hands trembled slightly. "I've found something significant." She finally met my gaze, her expression unreadable. "Significant how?" "Another anomaly in the background radiation. We discussed this, Thomas. My recent work has been imaginative." The word hung in the air, a gentle but firm dismissal. Imaginative, a polite way of saying delusional. "It's not imagination," I insisted, my voice rougher than I intended. I opened the satchel, pulling out the spectral analysis. "Look at this. The energy signatures. They don't conform to any known stellar or galactic phenomena, and the periodicity." I tapped the printout with a finger. "It's too regular, too deliberate." The chair picked up the sheet, her eyes scanning the complex graphs and numbers. A faint frown deepened. "This appears to be sensor noise, Thomas, or perhaps an artifact of my processing algorithms. Have I recalibrated my equipment recently?" "My equipment is fine," I said, the frustration building. "And these aren't artifacts. I've cross-referenced with multiple observatories. The pattern is consistent." I pushed the USB drive towards her. "The raw data is all there, hours of it. I can see it for myself." She pushed the drive back, her hand surprisingly firm. "I don't have time for extensive data dives, Thomas. My responsibilities lie with the department's ongoing projects, not with fringe theories." Fringe theories. The word struck me like a physical blow. This is not a fringe theory. This is evidence of something vast, something that's not just out there but interacting with us. My voice rose, and I saw a flicker of something annoyance, concern, in her eyes. "Interacting how?" she asked, her tone now laced with a weariness that felt like a judgment. I don't know the specifics yet, I admitted, the words tumbling out, but the patterns suggest influence, a shaping, and I believe it's looking at Earth now, actively. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady. Thomas, I understand I've been through a great deal, the loss of my wife. It's a profound trauma, but I cannot let it color my scientific objectivity. These are clearly the signs of someone under immense emotional strain. My breath hitched. He was using a leaner as a weapon. The icy grip of isolation tightened around my chest. They weren't listening. They couldn't hear it. The cosmic scream hidden within the data. I'm not delusional, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I'm telling the truth. The universe is not empty. It's not silent. It's occupied. She stood then, a clear signal that the conversation was over. I suggest I take some time off, Thomas. Reevaluate my work, perhaps focus on something more, grounded for my own good. I stood too, the weight of her dismissal pressing down on me. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to amplify a maddening drone. I gathered my satchel, the printouts feeling useless and flimsy in my hands. As I walked out of her office, I saw a colleague glance my way, a brief, pitying look before returning to his own work. They all saw it. The madman, the grieving widower. No one saw the truth. Back in the echoing quiet of the family estate in region not on standard maps, the silence was no longer comforting. It was a shroud. I was utterly alone. The data pulsed on my laptop screen, a beacon in the encroaching gloom. The patterns were still there, clearer now, more insistent. If they wouldn't listen, if they couldn't see, what did that mean for them and for me? The drive to the family estate in region not on standard maps was long. Miles of cracked asphalt gave way to rutted dirt tracks, the ancient trees lining the path pressing closer, their branches like skeletal fingers against the bruised twilight sky. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and acrid that I couldn't quite place. My hands clenched the steering wheel, gripped tight. The data from the observatory pulsed in my mind, a relentless, silent scream. I parked the car near the main house, a hulking silhouette against the fading light. It stood on a rise, its stone walls weathered and scarred, windows like vacant eyes staring out at the encroaching wilderness. No lights flickered within. It had been years since anyone had lived here, years since my wife. I pushed the thought away. Now was not the time for ghosts. I had to reach the old observatory dome. It was the only place left, the only place where I could try to make them understand. The dome, perched on a smaller knoll behind the main house, was a relic. Rust gnawed at its metal seams, and a fine layer of dust coated everything inside. The telescope, once my grandfather's pride, was now a silent sentinel, its brass tarnished, its lens clouded. But the equipment I'd brought, the portable server, the array of monitors, the custom-built interface was state-of-the-art. I worked quickly, my movements driven by a frantic energy. The air inside the dome was stale, carrying the faint, lingering smell of ozone, a scent I now associated with the anomaly. As I connected the final cable, a low thrum began, not from my equipment but from somewhere deeper, more fundamental. It was a sound that vibrated in my bones, a resonance that felt both ancient and utterly alien. The monitors flickered to life, displaying the familiar star charts, the swirling nebulae, silent, indifferent expanse of space. But tonight the familiar felt wrong. The stars seemed to shimmer with an unnatural intensity, as if a vast, unseen hand were stroking the velvet blackness, disturbing its quietude. I checked the readings, nothing. The anomaly wasn't registering on my instruments, not directly, but I could feel it. A subtle shift in the ambient pressure, a prickling sensation on my skin. The hairs on my arms stood on end. The thrumming intensified, a deep, guttural vibration that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath the dome. It was a sound that spoke of immense, unfathomable power. Then it began, not with a bang but with a whisper, a distortion in reality, subtle at first. The edges of my vision seemed to blur, to waver, as if looking through heat haze. The stars on the monitor began to shift, not in their celestial dance, but in a way that defied all physics. They rearranged themselves, coalescing into patterns that were both geometric and organic, patterns that seemed to pulse with a malevolent intelligence. It was the signature. The signature I had glimpsed in the data, the impossible architecture of the cosmos. Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't just observation. This was intrusion, a deliberate, calculated reshaping. I fumbled for the communication device, my fingers clumsy and numb. I had to reach them. The astrophysicist, the director, anyone who would listen. But when I activated it, all I heard was static, a chaotic hiss that seemed to mock my efforts. The thrumming had become a roar, a deafening cacophony that made my teeth ache. The dome began to groan, not the creaks of old metal settling, but a deep, resonant groan as if the structure itself were being squeezed. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The air grew colder, the metallic tang sharpening, burning my nostrils. I looked out through the open slit of the dome at the sky. The stars were no longer distant pinpricks of light. They were closer, too close. They pulsed with a sickly, phosphorescent glow, and the constellations I knew were dissolving, reforming into something else, something that made my stomach churn. A shadow fell across the monitors, vast and amorphous. It wasn't cast by anything I could see. The thrumming reached a crescendo, a sonic wave that slammed into me, forcing me to my knees. My ears rang, my vision swam. I could feel the pressure building not just in the air but inside my skull. This was it, the convergence. The moment the ancient intelligence decided to truly make its presence known, my breath hitched. The data had been a warning, a desperate plea from the universe itself, but it was too late. I had seen the patterns, understood the implication, but I had been too slow, too disbelieved. I looked at the telescope, its brass gleaming faintly in the unholy light. It was a relic of human curiosity, a tool meant to observe the distant. But now it felt like a conduit, a focal point. The anomaly wasn't just in the data, it was here now in this place, and it was reaching out. The ground beneath me began to vibrate, a tremor that shook the very foundations of the estate. Outside, the trees swayed violently, their branches thrashing as if in agony. The air crackled with an unseen energy. It was a sound of consumption, of absorption, of an infinite hunger. I scrambled towards the main console, my hands shaking uncontrollably. There had to be something, a failsafe, a countermeasure, something. But as I looked at the screens, at the impossible geometries unfolding in the sky, I knew. The universe was not just being observed, it was being rewritten. And Earth, my small, fragile world, was simply a page in its grand, terrifying narrative. The metallic scent intensified, thick and cloying like old blood and ozone. What could one man, armed with mere data and a broken heart, possibly do against a force that could unmake stars? The air in the car was stale, a cloying blend of old leather and my own sweat. Each mile of the journey to the family estate in region not on standard maps felt like a descent, the familiar world peeling away like old wallpaper. The trees, ancient and gnarled, clawed at the sky, their shadows stretching long and distorted across the increasingly uneven ground. A damp, earthy smell, heavy with something akin to decay, permeated the interior. I gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight. My wife, Alina, her absence a constant ache, would have hated this place. She'd always preferred the clean lines of the city, the predictable hum of civilization. This place felt wild, untamed. The estate itself emerged from the gloom like a forgotten tombstone. A sprawling, Gothic structure, it sagged under the weight of years, its stone walls stained with moss and time. The wrought iron gates, twisted into grotesque shapes, groaned a welcome as I pushed them open. They were rusted through, their hinges screaming a protest that echoed in the unnerving silence. No lights flickered in the windows, no sign of life. I parked the car, the engine's dying cough a pathetic sound in the vast emptiness. It wasn't the absence of noise, it was the presence of something else, something listening. I stepped out. A faint metallic tang like old blood or ozone tickled my nostrils. The house loomed, its silhouette sharp against the bruised twilight sky. I knew with a certainty that settled like ice in my gut that I shouldn't be here. Every instinct screamed at me to turn the car around, to drive back to the sterile safety of my laboratory, back to the comforting, if meaningless, order of my research. But the data, the anomaly, it had led me here. It had promised answers. Dust motes danced in the faint shafts of light that pierced the gloom from unseen sources. Cobwebs thick and silvery draped the ornate furniture like shrouds. I hesitated, my hand still on the doorframe. It was a held breath, a pause before a scream. I moved deeper into the house, my footsteps muffled by thick, threadbare carpets. Each room I entered was a tableau of decay. Portraits with faded eyes seemed to watch me, their painted gazes following my every move. A grandfather clock stood frozen at some forgotten hour, its pendulum still. In what must have been a study, stacks of brittle, yellowed papers lay scattered across a massive desk. I picked one up. The script was elegant, unfamiliar, and yet it spoke of celestial alignments, of forgotten rituals, of entities that predated stars. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating quiet. This was more than just an old house. It felt like a nexus, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. I found a large, leather-bound tome lying open on a lectern in what appeared to be a central hall. The pages were filled with intricate diagrams, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and writhe as I looked at them. They were not astronomical charts, not in any sense I understood. They were maps of something else, something vast and incomprehensible. As I traced a finger over one of the diagrams, a faint tremor ran through the floorboards beneath my feet. The tremor grew stronger, a low rumble that vibrated through the very marrow of my bones. The portraits on the walls rattled, their frames groaning. I stumbled back, my eyes darting around the hall. The air grew thick, charged with an unseen energy. A low hum began to emanate from the walls, a sound that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my skull. It was a sound that spoke of immense power, of something ancient and terrible awakening. The diagrams in the book pulsed with a faint internal light, mirroring the growing intensity of the hum. Then it stopped. The rumbling ceased. The hum faded. I looked around the hall. The portraits were still. The dust had settled. Yet something was different. The light filtering through the windows seemed wrong. The air itself felt thinner, as if reality itself had been stretched taut. I walked to a large, ornate mirror hanging on one of the walls. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't quite right. Behind me in the reflection, the hall was subtly altered. The furniture was arranged differently. A doorway, which I was certain hadn't been there moments before, stood ajar. I turned, expecting to see the change in the room itself, but the room remained as it was. The mirror showed something that was not there, or perhaps something that should have been there. The anomaly, the data, wasn't just about observing, it was about interaction. And now I was standing in a place that seemed to exist on the edge of what? Another layer of existence. My own reality was beginning to fray at the edges, and I was at its center. I looked back at the book, at the impossible diagrams. They were these instructions, a blueprint or a warning. And what exactly had I just woken up? The gravel crunched under the tires, a sound that felt too loud in the suffocating quiet. The family estate in region not on standard maps loomed, a silhouette against a bruised twilight sky. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a mausoleum built of stone and secrets. I pulled the handbrake, the mechanism groaning like a dying man. The engine ticked, a frantic heartbeat in the stillness. My wife. Her name was a whisper I barely dared to form. The data, the patterns, the impossible geometries that had consumed me, they all pointed here, to this place, to the legacy of my grandfather, the one who'd filled my childhood with tales of stars that sang and voids that watched. I dismissed them as the ramblings of a man lost to his own obsessions. Now I knew better. I stepped out of the car. It smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic and ancient, like blood spilled on forgotten stone. I had the key, a heavy, ornate thing that felt alien in my palm. It was meant for this door, for this final act. The lock turned with a sickeningly smooth click. The door swung inward, revealing an interior steeped in perpetual twilight. Dust motes danced in the faint shafts of light that pierced the gloom like lost souls. My footsteps echoed on the polished wood floor, each one a transgression. I moved through the main hall, past portraits of stern faces I barely recognized, their eyes seeming to follow me. This was where it began. The observatory, my grandfather had called it. The stairs creaked under my weight, a symphony of decay. I reached the top. No handle, just a strange, swirling symbol carved into its surface. I'd seen it before in the deepest, most corrupted layers of the cosmic data. It was a key, a sigil, my grandfather's sigil. I touched it. A jolt, not of electricity, but of pure, unadulterated knowledge, coursed through me. The door swung open without a sound. The observatory, it wasn't like I remembered. The telescope was still there. A colossal, archaic instrument pointed towards a section of the ceiling that wasn't a ceiling. It was a swirling vortex of impossible colors, a tapestry woven from light that didn't exist, from stars that had died before the first atom formed. It pulsed, slow and deliberate, like a colossal, sleeping heart, and the data. It wasn't on screens anymore. It was here. Geometric impossibilities unfolded before my eyes, shapes that defied Euclidean logic, forms that twisted and reformed, revealing glimpses of something vast, something that had no beginning and no end. This was the language, the true language of the cosmos. My grandfather hadn't been charting stars, he'd been charting them. The intelligence, the architects, the ones who had sculpted reality from the primordial chaos, and they were aware. They had always been aware. It wasn't just awareness. It was attention. My attention. The data I had uncovered, the patterns I had deciphered, they had acted as a beacon. I had announced myself. The vortex above flickered. A new pattern emerged, more intricate, more insistent than anything I had seen. It was a reflection. A distorted, alien reflection of myself. My wife's face, fractured and reassembled, swam within it. Not a memory, something else. A message, a promise, or a threat. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. My hands trembled. This was not a discovery. It was an invitation, an absorption. The universe wasn't just governed by laws. It was a living, thinking entity, and I had just made contact with its deepest, most terrifying consciousness. The air thrummed with an unseen energy, the faint hum of gears grinding on a scale I couldn't comprehend. The family estate in region not on standard maps was no longer a refuge. It was a nexus, a point of convergence. I looked at the vortex, at the swirling, impossible colors. Was this the end of everything I knew, or the beginning of something I could never escape? The reflection of my wife's face dissolved, replaced by a single, luminous point of pure, indifferent light. It expanded slowly, inexorably. Was this the resolution or the unveiling?